going to ask you for this week, you start looking at the world through the lens of trauma. What do I mean by that? The question is not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And unless we deal with that, we just can't move forward.
What's up, guys? Namo Himalaya. Stephan Piel from Shared Reality here. I'm a communication scholar, media literacy advocate, and law of attraction practitioner. And today we're going to talk about ever-embattled spiritual leader Teal Swan. So I've been seeing more and more of Teal Swan's TikToks and Reels pop up in suggested places, friends sharing them in groups that we're in together. You know, I was surprised when someone I knew was like, I love Teal Swan so much, because my introduction to her was in the 2018 Gizmodo podcast, The Gateway. And although that was like 4 years ago, so I don't remember the details, I remember it being supremely disconcerting. And I remember the gist being that she kind of encourages her followers through these dangerous practices to contemplate and really consider suicide. And so now her getting all this attention, I was like, that's kind of weird. But from what I had seen of the videos that people were sharing, I'm like, well, I don't disagree with the sentiment here, I don't disagree with the sentiment here. So I'm like, well, now that I'm much farther in my spiritual awakening and further on my spiritual journey, maybe I should revisit The Gateway, or just revisit Teal Swan in general and see if maybe, you know, something was lost in translation for me back then. And I will say, revisiting her work, I didn't go back and listen to the Gateway series because just so happened as I was coming up with, you know, developing this plan of revisiting her stuff, Hulu and Freeform actually released a documentary called The Deep End, where they embedded for 3 years with Teal Swan and her like close inner circle of the Teal tribe, like within her home, and how that group functions, and just really shows behind the scenes in an in-depth way that is insane. I was like, how did she sign on for this? Like, how did they get so much revealed? Like, how are they so comfortable? It was crazy. So anyway, one of the main controversies surrounding Teal is her focus on suicidal ideation, and she does actually target people as if it's her YouTube niche to, like, if you're looking up things about anxiety, about depression, about suicidal thoughts, about, you know, plans to kill yourself, like Teal Swan's videos are probably going to pop up. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because she is trying to help people, but when you're actually targeting such vulnerable people, you have to be really, hopefully, responsible and ethical in the way that you approach treating them, because it can have severe consequences. Like, even the best intentions can have really, really negative consequence. And there are some people who, like, lawsuits against Teal that claim that, I believe civil lawsuits that claim, you know, this couple claims their daughter killed themselves because of Teal's influence. And I don't think it's that easy to draw like a straight line for like, this is cause, this is effect, especially when it comes to suicide and mental health, because so varied, so in depth, and so many things go into that. I wouldn't want to just blame Teal for all her followers, who obviously were already the type to look that up online. And like, I don't want to blame that entirely on Teal, because obviously her followers are probably already in a dark place to be looking up this content for that result to ping. And one of the things they highlight on the show a lot is her saying, and on the Gizmodo podcast back in the day, I believe as well, is a highlight on her saying, like, suicide is a valid option, suicide is a reset button. And so the idea is, like, because she preaches reincarnation, that you can just you don't like your life, you can just hit the reset button and start a new one. And I can't say that I disagree with that, right? Because I too believe in reincarnation. But I think she's missing a key point, which is, you have chosen to incarnate in this reality, in this version of yourself for a reason. And things are unfolding exactly as they should. The lessons you have to learn are always going to be the lessons that you have to learn. No matter how many lifetimes it takes for you to break free of that, you don't get to avoid it, you know? So you could try and hit that reset button, but the same things that are upsetting you, the same things that are triggering you to feel this despondent, this detached, this separate, this lonely, you know, this suicidal, if you're feeling that way, it's not going to go away by resetting your life. You're going to be in a different circumstance, might seem better, grass is always greener type of way. Different outer shell, but the inside core will still be the same. Your lessons, you will still have to learn those same lessons. So it's really setting yourself back. It's not a reset, it's a delay. You're really pulling yourself back on your spiritual journey if you choose suicide. So the fact that she is like, one thing she does say in the documentary is like, I'm going to tell you how it is, whether you're ready to hear it or not. And while that might seem like bold and like valiant to some, it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't put it on the person who can't mentally handle it right now, And some people do have a positive reaction to her teachings, and actually, because she'll have people like visualize their death, visualize their funeral, visualize their suicide, which, especially if you're already in thoughts of like making plans to kill yourself, can be a very dangerous thing. But other people have the reaction that I think she's going for, which is like, oh, I'm choosing life because this option scared me. But again, not everyone reacts to that message in the same way. And I believe she had a warrant out for her arrest, or at least the DA, there was some paperwork I saw in one of the documentaries that was saying she was an unlicensed therapist. And granted, she's never claimed to practice therapy. She is just an energy healer. But the state of Utah thought that her practices were enough to warrant a cease and desist on her being in any way a mental health practitioner. And a lot of people do go to her for treatment and healing. And what's jarring about it to me is that she is really big into like recovered memories, and specifically recovered memories of like satanic ritual child abuse. Because that apparently is Teal's origin story. And I've watched so many videos in the past week specifically just about this. I watched the Mormon Stories interviews with Jared Dobson, who was one of Teal's exes, also with one of Teal's childhood friends. And these are like some hours long podcast episodes where they really go in depth into just Teal's origin story and how she is. I also watched one that cut together videos of past interviews Teal had given, because she claimed she was in a cult, basically in multiple satanic cults, unbeknownst to her parents, unbeknownst to like all the therapists she went to see, all the like counselors and all these people that she said her parents brought her to because they couldn't handle her ESP abilities, all somehow missed out on this ritualistic abuse she was undergoing. Even though these people are mandatory reporters, that means they have to report to the state if they suspect child abuse is going on in any way. The things she said she went through would have left scars, would have left signs, physical signs for people to see, as well as just the behavior and the way someone acts when they're going through that. Because for all intents and purposes, she was just a normal high schooler by the look of it. And again, I don't want to discount anyone's trauma or what she may or may not have been through, and I normally do default to believe the survivors. But when you look into what she said about what she's gone through, all her stories are completely inconsistent. Huge details change. They get more and more grandiose as time goes on. Her claim, she said she was forced into bestiality, she's forced into necrophilia, watching like 7 children be murdered, seeing ritual cannibalism, and just these like really, really horrific things that also sound terribly made up, because where are these missing children? Where's the proof? And one of the huge red flags to me is Teal's therapist when she was a child was Barbara Snow. Now Barbara Snow, known to anyone who studied the Satanic Panic, which was a big phenomenon in the 1980s in the US. People were afraid of Dungeons and Dragons, they were afraid of metal music, and they started attributing murders and things to, oh, these kids are goth, it must be them because they're into the occult and they're trying to do all these dangerous things. And it led to a lot of therapists practicing recovered memory. And while there is like actual repressed memories, people do experience trauma so great that they make the conscious thought of like, okay, I need to block this out. But usually those are recovered by like, a sense memory, something in your environment triggering it, or your brain just randomly remembering when it feels you're ready. This is different in that it's people going into a therapist session where the therapist has these, leads them through a hypnosis, leads them almost to the answer of this ritual child abuse. That's why so many people were showing up having, oh yeah, I was in this cult too, I was in a different cult, and blah blah blah, all this stuff, and all saying these crazy things, because a kid's imagination will run wild with it, and especially when these questions are leading in that direction. So even a well-intentioned therapist using these practices could accidentally implant these ideas into a patient's head. It's the same way that someone's in a long interrogation with police officers, and through that interrogation, without the police even realizing, they're like, oh, and what'd you do with the knife? What'd you do with the knife? And then they'd be like, oh, I stabbed them. And it's like, okay, but what else did you do? And that's how they end up with a very detailed false confession. And people will be like, well, how do they know this? How did you know he stabbed her or was even stabbed? We never said that. It's like, well, you mentioned the knife. You just didn't realize somewhere in your reality. And this can happen with, in therapy as well. Because these satanic panic claims, these child ritual abuse claims, were investigated, not Teal specifically, but just a bunch of them from the 80s were investigated extensively by the FBI, by state investigators, and found literally no physical evidence of any of this happening at all, ever. So it's just been widely debunked that this was ever a thing. So the fact that Teal went to a therapist who was known for practicing this and known for giving people these false memories is a huge flag to me that her origin story is less than truthful. Now, I'm not saying she hasn't suffered trauma, because unfortunately child abuse is super common. It's a huge problem. Sexual abuse in general is a huge problem. And her ex-boyfriend Jared Dobson does say that Teal was diagnosed with her ex-boyfriend Jared Dobson does say that Teal Swan was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and that often is a result of undergoing severe trauma. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but from what I know of it and from those I know have experienced it. And so, something might have happened to Teal, certainly, but the cannibalism, the bestiality, the necrophilia, the stuff that just sounds really fantastical, really made up, I do believe just comes from this flawed, disproven therapeutic method. But this is also something that she is using on her followers. There's someone in the deep end that is one of her inner circle that is there who's oh, I just recently discovered I was abused, and just cut off all ties with their family. But it was something that she just recovered. And so people are going in trying to get help, and then might get this false memory implanted that actually gives them more trauma. It's just crazy to me. Because, I want to give Teal the benefit of the doubt. I'm okay, I've heard the Gizmodo podcast, The Deep End was wild, I loved it. It's only 4 episodes, but I want it to be way, way more. And then I was I'll give her the benefit of the doubt, and I'll go watch her documentary that's on Gaia, the 2017, The Open Shadow. And it's follows Teal and Blake around, they look really young in it compared to The Deep End, and just again tells her origin story in her own words. But in this one, she's not claiming bestiality, necrophilia, all this stuff. She more so is saying that the guy who was her horse trainer, or whoever her parents let her go off with, claims that he would just dose her with ketamine and then psychologically torture her and make her envision her mom hanging from the rafters, skinned and really fucked up stuff. But in that documentary, she says to the camera, it was all psychological, but you don't understand the horror of having someone implant a traumatic memory in you, because that can totally change you. And she's 100% right. It's the same reason we go back and try to undo our conditioning and put positive thoughts in there, because it can change your thoughts, it can change your behaviors. your subconscious thoughts of yourself. And so if you have traumatic memories banked in there, even if they're false, even if they're implanted in there, they can do serious damage to you. Which is why it was so ironic to me. I'm like, this is what you are doing to your followers, is encouraging them to fabricate these like really traumatic events from their so-called past that allegedly occurred. And then she'll be like, okay, if they can't convince that they're in this lifetime, then it's like maybe other traumas, let's remember those from your past life. And she calls this shadow work, and maybe I'm just being too sensitive about it because I live in the light and she lives in the shadow. But I would assume that people that are trying to come out of depression and trying to come out of suicidality and trying to get rid of their anxiety would very much enjoy living in the light too. I think it's where we as divine human spiritual beings belong. Not to discount shadow work. You feel your emotions, work through them. Look at all parts of yourself, accept all parts of yourself. But living in the shadow, living in that negativity is not something that appeals to me, and it seems like she likes to draw people into that shadow with her. And the deep end is just such a crazy look at her life because of just how controlling and how reactive she is, that it's insane to me that she's a spiritual leader, truthfully, because like she has no emotional regulation. She's like triggered and reactive at every little thing, super egotistical, like led by the ego, completely like paranoid about how people are seeing her, who's handling what information. There's like a scene in it where she's like in a little workshop with like fans or followers, I guess, on the floor, and she's confronting this one guy because he's like, well, who do you look up to? Just an innocent question, and she's like, what? That's like so stupid. Why would I look up to anyone? Like, why would you even follow me if I looked up to anyone? Because I'm like the true enlightened person and blah, blah, blah. I was like, what? Because like my spiritual master has a master, who has a master, who has masters in this realm and other realms. Like there are other realms. There are always people to look up to. There's always like better to strive for. And she thinks she's like top tier, the number one enlightened being. And yet someone does something she doesn't like and she like snaps at them. She gets vindictive. She plays silent treatment. Like, can you imagine like the Dalai Lama snapping at someone? Like, I'm not trying to play like I'm like holier than thou. I definitely get cranky and have my moments. I'm also not claiming to be like the most enlightened being in the world. It's just crazy to me that people can look at Teal and see her vibe and see how she behaves and think like this is the end all be all of spiritual salvation. Like, this is a healed person. I see a very, very damaged, very in need of help, very triggered person, very reactive person. And honestly just get like generic high school bully vibes from her. Not that I knew any high school bullies like that, but just like high school 90s movie bully, I guess. There's one scene in it where Blake, her longtime partner, if anyone from the Teal tribe is watching this, who of course know him, has his fiance, soon-to-be wife, there living with him, trying to see if she can make it work in the inner circle, and Teal clearly just has like a jealousy with her, a problem with her, because she wants to break her into submission to kind of follow her inner circle rules and be in this position underneath her, basically. And she makes everyone sit down in a big circle and be like, why doesn't everyone's like talk together about how they think she feels about me and what's wrong about it and what needs to change? And then basically people go wrong and be like, why do you hate this girl? Why do you hate this girl? Why do you hate this girl? Like, essentially it was just so like, and I hate when people do that with like, oh, we're gonna pretend like this is just us being open and honest and we're all sharing here. And it's like, no, you're cornering this person, you're ganging up on them. If you actually cared and actually wanted to foster that connection, you would have like a one-on-one conversation. You would see how people were feeling. It wouldn't be like Teal's way or the highway. And what's so funny is in the series, I guess Blake does, but her team hires a private investigator to really debunk the claims that Teal Swan is leading a cult. And then the investigator, like, it shows it a preview for 1 week, and she's like, oh, I wish I hadn't seen this. And then she's like, I don't even think this is legal. And basically, like, the form that Teal makes her inner circle abide by is basically like, you cannot have a boundary that affects Teal in any way. So it's like, what? we're all responsible for our own personal emotional regulation. We're all responsible for our own reactions and our own actions. Like, to be like, you can't have a boundary. Like, so if an upset door, if a closed door upsets Teal, like, can't have it. If you needed to take a phone call from your mom when Teal wanted to tell your story, like, can't have it. Like, just the weirdest little stuff that you would, it's just tyrannical. And I get like, oh, self-sacrifice for a greater mission, and that's what they try to parse it as. But this is like self-sacrifice to like feed the ego of a narcissistic leader. And so, like, I know her following is only getting stronger. Like, she's getting more and more recognition. I'm glad the Deep End is out there to show what I feel I've always seen of her, not only because Gizmodo is what exposed me to it, and that's how it was framed, but just the vibe I get from her, like, is definitely dark. Definitely dark. And the more I learn and the more I watch, the more it just blows my mind. But I'm still captivated by her, right? Like, she's an eloquent speaker. She's obviously got this magnetism that draws in so many people. Some people do feel genuinely helped by her. I don't want to discount that. Then again, at the same time, whatever tools you use, you are ultimately the one who's always saving yourself. Like, no one can save you. Don't give anyone else credit for saving you. That was all you. And I hope anyone that has been exposed to her practices hasn't been too negatively affected by it. Because in the Satanic Panic back in the 80s and stuff, like, there were wrongful convictions, like people actually getting convicted on nothing, on no evidence, nothing but speculation basically, and forced confessions, and families ripped apart, you know, parents randomly accused of assaulting their children, and just really, really terrible consequences. And this method, like, it's similar to Scientology too. That's how they do auditing in Scientology is, oh, think of this. Like, oh, this didn't happen. That's okay. Just think of it. Just imagine where it would have happened. And then, like, oh, pull up details of it. What color was the carpet? What color was the wall? What color was the carpet? And you just ask the same things over and over again and keep feeding that visualization until it becomes vivid enough that they think it's real. Because that, like, memory is not like a camera recorder that you just pop in the tape and revisit. You know, every time, and there have been so many studies about this, they're super interesting if you look into it, but just the way memory works, it's so suggestible and so malleable. Like, every time you revisit a memory and add in a new detail, or someone else gives you a detail, like, there are things we think we remember from childhood that are actually just visualizations of stories that have been told to us because we're too young to actually remember. And everything you hear, you know, in the media that you consume, everything you learn, the way things have changed in modern day and how you see it now, all these are going to affect that memory. And then I keep trying to not watch Teal Swan videos. She's very disappointed in how the Deep End came out. I think she thought that's why she gave the access, because she thought it would be a lot more like pro-Teal documentary. I think it was an honest portrayal. Like, I don't see how this could have, she says it's edited manipulatively. I don't see how, like, her reactions and just like what the PI is saying and all the stuff, how that could have been edited any differently, or to show a different story, I mean. But she started this campaign that's like, release the footage, and as I said, they were embedded for 3 years, so I really don't think they're gonna release 3 years of footage. If they did, that would be awesome, because as I said, it was only 4 episodes, and I want way, way more, because it is such a captivating story, and she does have such, like, a magnetism that you just want to watch. But then at the same time, I know that, like, a good amount of disinformation and misinformation is spread because it trends, because so many people are like, oh, this is wrong, and every time you do that, you're spreading more of it. So I've been trying not to watch her rebuttal videos, really, but she's making quite a few of them, and they are entertaining. But again, I don't know if I want to feed the beast, so to speak, of what is the Teal tribe and her empire, because regardless of her intention, I don't know if she's doing it just to have power, just to be manipulative over people. A lot of the interviews of people who knew her interpersonally suggest that. But even if she's intending to help, I think it's doing more harm than good. Because although a lot of the things she discusses are just like true, they're normal New Age things that you can find from pretty much anyone who's dabbled in New Age spirituality. She's not holding some secret key to anything, in my opinion. And the practices she is touting can be really, really, really harmful. So just always when you're exploring the spiritual space, be sure to look out for number one, listen to your inner voice, because that is always going to be more important than any other guru, any other leader, anyone who tries to tell you what you know in your soul, what is right for you, and only you can determine that. So never give away your autonomy, never give away control. You have to really, especially in these spaces where we're putting ourselves into deep meditations, where you're opening your mind up to be reprogrammed because you want positive things to come of it. You really, really, really have to trust who you are following, and I think you can only trust if you have all the facts to make an informed decision. So if you come in contact with Teal Swan content, if she's been on your peripheral and you were thinking of looking more into her, or if you're already like tried and true Teal tribe, I just encourage you to take a breath and really look at everything that's out there about this person and about the truthfulness of what she claims to be, her story, and just really the consequences of the type of healing that she practices. I think they're all definitely worth looking into, because obviously if it works for you, it works for you. Follow whoever you want. She's got 2 million followers, she vibes with some people. But I think a lot of people vibe with her because they don't realize what's really going on the other side. So I highly recommend watching The Deep End for sure, checking out the Gizmodo podcast. As I said, the Teal Swan's own documentary, you can watch that on Gaia as well. But again, compare that to some of the other videos and interviews that she just done about the same incidents in the past and has since taken down, and just the way her story's changed. And decide for yourself what you trust and what you want to try. Just make sure you always have your boundaries on looking out for number one, yourself. Because you being you is what's going to serve the planet best, and you being you is what the universe needs from you. Don't let anyone take that autonomy away. Well guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope it helped shed some light on who Teal is. It's just so interesting for me to look into like cults or semi-cults, or especially modern ones. Especially being in a bunch of online spiritual communities myself, it's super interesting to look inside and see how another one is functioning. Yeah, so I appreciate it. I thank you. I love you. And I will see you next time.